All right. Hello, everyone. Real quick introduction. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. Bill McCauley. I have been with Secure Ideas for well, I'm going into my seventh year now. It's been a while. I actually met at a B-Sides Oklahoma conference at one point. We started talking, and sure enough, here we go. Wide variety of background. In fact, I was listening and talking to a few other people who specialize in certain areas. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who have specialized in these different areas because that's one thing that I've never wanted to do. I've always wanted to learn bits of everything. I never wanted to be the specialist. I always wanted to be the generalist. And so that actually shows in a lot of the background when we've got electronics where I was building circuit boards for radios and radars and things like that versus avionics when I was doing military work in the Air Force. So working on tankers, all the way to doing compliance work or healthcare IT. So a huge variety of things, which in the long run, I've thoroughly appreciated because it gives me a broad, very, very broad scope of things. If I don't know a system, if I'm looking at a situation, I may not know the exact system or the exact configuration that we're looking at, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have something that I can tie it back to, something that I can make that mental connection to and that mental link and be able to have at least some point of reference moving forward. So with that, I actually live out in the middle of nowhere. So the nearest town to me, I'm in a remote location. The nearest town to me I'm not even in town. It's population 3,000. So I am literally in the middle of nowhere. I've got about 9 acres out here. We had some cows. We still have the cows. They're just in the freezer now. Dogs, cats, chickens, everything. A few things that I enjoy: snowboarding. Have not had the time to do it, especially down in Texas because I'm in the Texas area, Dallas area. And home brewing I picked up. There's a few other things. I love the Ghostbusters reference. Keep them coming. So enough about me. We're going to go ahead and hop into this. One of the focuses that we wanted to touch on as part of this, because the last class that I did was a foundational application security. And a lot of that was meant for a higher level, either management or refresher or intro into AppSec. I'm going to go ahead and throw this into the channel real quick if I can. Well, never mind. I'll put it in later. We have an upcoming class for Ps. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because we get a lot of questions about what about pen testing? What about getting into security? What can I do with this? And I was recently at a B-Sides Oklahoma where this question came up every 5 minutes. And I'm a little bit different when it comes to encouraging people into pen testing specifically, because in most situations, people have an unrealistic expectation of what pen testing is. They see TV, they see the glam, right? They see the exploits, they see the fun side of it. They see those parts of it, but they don't look at what it actually looks like on a day-to-day basis in reality. And so one of the things that I tend to encourage people to do is to consider if this is what they want to do, because they may want to do security and they may just think pen testing is the flashy thing that they want to be known for. What they don't realize is it comes with a lot of work. As we mentioned earlier, you're constantly trying to learn new things. You're constantly trying to keep ahead of what's new, what's been released, what are the new vectors, right? What do I have to defend against? And so while it's fun for a short period of time to constantly be learning a lot of things, once that stretches out 5, 6, 7 years, it can take a toll. And so one of the things that people don't talk about is there's a lot of burnout in this environment. And so being able to pace yourself and having a realistic expectation is one of the things that I encourage people to look at. And communication, because when you're doing testing, one of the things that is often overlooked is the necessity for communication, whether that's verbal or written. Because at the end of the day, when someone is testing, the only thing that client or that customer is going to have is usually going to be a report saying, we tested this, this, and this. Here's the results. Here's the recommendations. And so if you focus strictly on the technical aspect of things and have neglected being able to communicate, because you'll have to talk to your C-suite executives at some point, you'll have to talk to the IT people at some point, and you'll have to talk to people that are completely non-technical. And so being aware that that type of communication is necessary for this job will give you a realistic expectation of what to look forward to and what to prepare for if you decide to go into it. So all that aside is kind of the intro. We have a class coming up for PEAS, Professionally Evil Application Security, and I wanted to point to a lot of this. The main focus today is two things: web application testing and small to medium businesses. Because on one side, you're going to have people that are doing penetration testing, testing your controls, whether it's through black box, gray box, white box engagements, or you're going to have people trying to implement controls to protect against whatever the report finds. So on one side, you've got pen testing, which is a fantastic tool for actually validating that the controls you put in place are working as expected. And so the components of that, the idea that people have is very, very, they have this, I've got the crypto nerds imagination up here. They've got a very complex view of what this involves, when in most cases, if you've ever heard Kevin Johnson speak, he will refer to pen testing often as glorified QA. And a lot of those things that we deal with are configuration based, or things that if they had done best practices from the beginning or implemented secure design from the beginning, then a lot of those vulnerabilities or a lot of those weaknesses would not have been there. Yeah, somebody mentioned burnout. It is a real thing. And so the comic says it all. I love it. In most cases, the attacker, when they look at a system, are going to default to whatever the path of least resistance happens to be. And so in a nutshell, I wanted to go over and I wanted to look at some of the things that are included in a penetration test. In most cases, you're going to have some sort of reconnaissance. This is where you're going to have public sources of information. This is whether it's focused externally or on a web app. If you've got a public-facing web app that maybe a bank or a financial institution or some other company will use, it's good to do some open source reconnaissance, things that have been dumped, things that have been leaked online. And this will give you at least some sort of information about the organization itself, the systems or the applications in use. In web app testing in particular, sometimes this is useful, sometimes not. The place where it really helps is if you're looking for harvesting material or if you're looking for social engineering. This is one of those things, recon, where it can shed light on if there's been publicly disclosed vulnerabilities in the past. Maybe last year they had a breach sometime. Maybe there was some other litigation that was going on. Those are the types of things that when you're doing a pen test, especially something that is externally accessible, gives you a bit of insight into the environment that you're testing with. And having that insight just gives you more information when you actually go to attack the application. Oh, and if you have, if there's a tool for dark web monitoring, this is also, it's been hit or miss in my experience that sometimes there will be useful information there, other times not, but it's always worth checking out. If you've got some sort of dark web monitoring service that you could look at to say, oh, what's been leaked? Are there credentials? What are the accounts? Sometimes you'll find useful things there. In the PEAS course, we're going to go through all of these things. The difference is SamuraiWTF is going to be a virtual environment that's going to be used to have vulnerable applications to attack, as well as tools to attack it with. And so Jennifer is the one planning to teach that course. It'll be later in May, I want to say 21, 22, and 23. I'll have to double check the actual dates for you. And I'll put it into the chat afterwards. But she'll be going through and there'll be hands-on, as in, this is the vulnerability, this is the section we're working on, here's the environment, let's go in and do this type of work. So they'll take notes. The only part that they're not planning to do is the reporting part. which I'm going to push to do something because it's actually a really good experience to try and write up a report once you've gone through and you've mapped out a system, once you've found the vulnerability, and once you've started to go through and say, okay, well, what do I have to do to exploit? Keeping that in mind that at the end of the day, as a tester, you're going to have to write something up. And having that in mind from the beginning helps you better reach that end goal once you actually get to the reporting stage, which people typically don't think of until, it's the day before reporting is ready and you spent the past week testing an application and your notes are everywhere. It happens, it's a thing. So when you get into the system mapping, and this is really going to be just a quick overview, this is where you're going to study the systems, study the services. You're going to understand the key part of mapping is this. When you get into the application, you're not immediately trying to find vulnerabilities. What you're trying to do, because in most cases, you probably have never seen this application before. And so if you're having someone test your system, likely they've never seen this app before. And so they're going to be learning, how does a user interact with the system? How does an administrator interact with the system? And understanding the functionality that's there, that's the key part, because now you know what the system is meant to do, and you're able to spend later when you get to the discovery phase. When you get to that phase, you already understand the layout, how the different components interact with one another. Now, one of the items that comes up is that when you're mapping and you see something really interesting, the temptation is to say, so let me stop everything I'm doing and let me attack this piece. We have a general guideline for this. We have a general rule of thumb that we give it 5 tries or 5 minutes-ish, right? That's not a hard rule. That's a general rule. The idea behind that rule is, if I get to the second page of the application, if I get there and I see this thing and I spend the next 2 hours beating my head against it, when if I had just gone through the rest of the application, maybe 5 or 6 pages later, I would have come across something that would have given me the key to get through this section, right? Make a note that there's something here to circle back to, but try not to sink all of your time into it, because what happens is you end up with 2 hours dumped into this that's going nowhere. And so we have a rule that when we're mapping, keep the focus. We want to understand what the functionality does as a normal user, because if we understand how it normally behaves, then we can start thinking of ways that we can abuse it to do things that it was not intended to do. Yeah, I saw the picture of Kevin on the chat. Oh, that's hilarious. But yeah, 5 tries, 5 minutes. Typically when you're mapping, understand what the application is doing, understand the business logic, because that's a place where automated tooling does not do well, is that the interaction with business logic and the way those pieces sometimes interact, automated tooling typically has a hard time with that. And so if you understand that, you're going to be much better as a tester in general, but it's going to be much more valuable for the application you're dealing with. So what are the key pieces of functionality used? Make note of those things, make note of interesting items. And then as you circle back to the beginning, once you get done looking through the entire system, circle back and then go through it again with the idea that, okay, now that we've gathered information, we're trying to discover vulnerabilities in what we see. Here's the information gathered in the previous 2 steps, recon maybe, usually system mapping is where we'd end up starting. What vulnerabilities can we find? Do we check for authentication? Do we check for authorization? How about session management? How are those things being handled? Is it an O365 environment? Have they applied the benchmark recommendations for security? Right, you go through and you check those types of things. You have to balance between manual tools and automated tools in most cases. I'm looking back at the comic here, and one of the reminders that I have when I think of this is it's usually not a whole lot. In fact, we were on a test last week or the week before, I think it was last week, that we had talked with one of their QA people, and they were discussing whether or not they could afford the tooling for testing their internal web application. And so during that conversation, really the only thing that you need to test a web app is you need a browser and you need some sort of proxy, whether it's Zap or Burp or something else. Those are really the two main things that you need. So the tools that you need to test a web app are often not much. And so, but you still have to consider between whether you've got manual tools versus automated tools. Some key things to look at when you're looking at vulnerability discovery, things that we still find everywhere besides auth, username harvesting, right? These are simple things that you would find just from a general look at an application. Input validation. Think of this as any place that a user is able to input data, input anything into the system, needs to be validated, needs to be verified. I cannot talk today. Needs to be validated, needs to be verified, and needs to be checked to make sure that it is sanitized for the app. And this, I want to call out, also is applicable to B2B applications. Here's the example. Business 1 gathers information, sends it over to Business 2. Business 2 says, oh, all of that data is coming from a trusted source, therefore we're going to trust these inputs. And it submits the inputs. If Business 1 is not validating or sanitizing the input that they receive from users, then that gets passed on not just in the current application, but also to the other application that it gets sent to. And so when you start looking at the application during your mapping phase, understanding the usage gives you an insight into, well, how can I abuse this functionality? How can I abuse this information to attack this system or some related system within that you have access to? Exploitation, really, if you've done all of the other steps correctly, 5 tries, 5 minutes. If you've done the other part well, then the exploitation should be straightforward. Now, a couple considerations when you get to the exploitation phase, because this arguably is the most exciting part of any web app test. Can I exploit it? Considerations. Is it appropriate to do so? What are the ramifications of doing this? Am I going to submit something that is going to dump the database table on a cardholder data environment? Is that appropriate to do? Those are the type of considerations. Or do I have enough information now to show that the vulnerability or the flaw exists, and to give it enough weight that the organization receiving the pen test can properly understand the risk involved? This is also one of those places where you want to have conversations with whoever the client is, because at the end of the day, it's their system, it's their environment, it's their stuff. You want to make sure that as a tester, you're handling those things well. So considerations: is it appropriate to actually exploit it, or do I have enough information right now to prove that this is a problem? But one of the key values to the exploitation phase is that now you're providing a realistic understanding of what exposure that application may have. And if this is their main web application that is public to the world, then that could be a huge thing. If this is something that's internal, that's a smaller app, right, the risk overall may be different. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have exploitation, or I'm sorry, reporting. I was looking at the wrong one. And this is going to be your final deliverable. This is going to be where you communicate at different levels to different groups, the things that matter to them. If you're talking to the executives, they're really not going to care about the nuts and bolts of what you found. In most cases, they're going to care about, why is this a risk to my business? Why should I care? And what is the input to our organization as a whole? So if you're saying, oh, there was input validation, there was cross-site scripting, and because of this, now you have access to all of this user data, that's an easy thing for them to understand, that this is a bad thing. once you get down to the actual finding, say, okay, what are the specifics? How is this recreated? This is where the IT people are going to love this part of it. And so you need to be able to write to and communicate to each of those different groups to the things that matter to them. Okay, so that is in a nutshell. Here, you know what? Let me find. I found I thought I saw this earlier. Let me check. Yep, okay. I thought someone had pasted the Peace course in there earlier. Really, the Peace course, just as a quick point forward, they're going to focus on recon mapping. They're going to focus on servers, client-side controls, and different considerations like that. When you're looking at pen testing, or when you are having a pen test done, keep these things in mind. The person pen testing should be trying to understand how an attacker is going to behave and what types of weaknesses, flaws that they're going to interact with. As an attacker, that's what they want to do. As the person receiving the test, you want to make sure that your pen testing team is looking at it because you want them to focus on the priority items first. Their goal should be to help a company improve their security posture, not to point out, you were horrible, you did this, you can't do anything right, right? That's not the purpose of a pen test. The purpose of a pen test, the ultimate goal is to find the flaws, to find the issues, and to fix them before an attacker gets to them. For people who are doing tests, it's important to remember, or if you have people internally who are doing your technical, your IT work, that you're not allowed, even if you work for the company, even if you're in the IT team, you may not be allowed to test those environments without written permission. You need to make sure explicitly that you have permission to test. And anytime a pen tester does this type of work, it has to be under contract. Otherwise, you open yourself up to all kinds of problems, legal and otherwise. And then boundaries, always want to make sure as a tester you follow the rules of engagement. In most cases, we need to make sure that we test things that have permission. We need to make sure that we understand what's appropriate and what's not, and that we're authorized to touch the systems that we do. Okay, high level thoughts about pen testing. I wanted to stop for a second and just see if there were any questions. I figured that since we're here and since pen testing was the first section of this, I wanted to answer any questions that may come up. Or if you think of questions, send them through. We'll catch up at the end of the meet if needed. I'll give it a second here because I see people typing. Infosec is blue teaming or red teaming? Getting confused with pen test methodologies. So the question is, Infosec being blue team or red team? In reality, Infosec is typically, I consider it as a purple team engagement. This is where you're taking defensive considerations and offensive considerations, and you're combining them into a single area. That's my position on it. That's my perspective on it, is that those two aspects, going back to when I did military, we had attack team, we had defense team. Neither one was the priority. Both were valuable because both are situations that we would be involved in. There are times when we need to be the attacking group. There are times when we need to be the defensive group. Those two working together is a comprehensive solution, right? You want to have both of those teams working together. Typically, there can be some animosity between blue and red teams. If the goal, going back to this, if the goal is to improve the overall security posture, right? Both have a value, both have their proper place, and they need to work together. Give yourself over to the purple side. I love that meme. I'm going to take that. Oh, that's hilarious. Okay. While the questions are still coming through, I'm going to swap over for a minute because the first part of this was pointing forward to a class we have and doing a quick primer into an overview of a pen test. The second side of this is focused more on small, medium businesses, which by definition is going to be more of the defensive side. So that question about, someone said they always thought Infosec was mostly blue, but purple makes more sense. You know, it can actually depend on the balance and the core business that you're dealing with. If anyone's taken the CISSP, the CISP, your business continuity plan, one of the first things that you're going to have to do is identify what are the core business functions that are necessary to keep my business up and running. Those are the things that make the business successful. Those are the things that create revenue for business, and for financial institution, it may be different than for industry-based. Very, very different depending on where you're at and what the business actually is. And so if, again, going back to the security versus defense, this is just my perspective. I believe that it should be purple because that is going to give the most benefit between the two different sides that are necessary for a business, because you need to be able to make sure that your organization can withstand an attack. Your defense needs to be good, and your infosec should be looking at those different types of attacks and understanding what they are, how they work, and how best to defend. And the reason you want to understand those three things is because when someone offers you a solution, if you know what it is, how it works, then you're going to know if the solution they give you is actually fixing the symptom or if it's going to be fixing the root cause of whatever you're dealing. Hopefully that makes sense. So small to medium businesses. Let's see. I heard a notification pop up. Okay. The thought here is when you're dealing with smaller, medium businesses, what keeps you up at night? Are there security events? Is it a new compliance requirement? That's one that we haven't touched on yet, because compliance is a really big thing. What type of risks, whether you're in the health, hold on. I scrolled. Scroll was bad. I'm back, but now my windows are off. There we go. I think I'm back. But I've lost my Discord. There it is. Got it. Apologize for that. That was fun. Okay. So is it a security event? Compliance requirements. What would you consider to be an existential risk to the organization? That's one thing we want to keep in mind as we go forward, because anything you protect, you want to protect to the correct level. The reason that we have, and I do a foundational data protection, and the reason we protect data at different classifications, whether it's top secret, secret, for official use only, whatever it may be, the reason we protect them at different levels and to different degrees is because the impact that that data can have. If I've got something that is top secret data and it gets exposed, there is a higher likelihood of extreme or grave damage being done. If I take something that is for official use only and it gets exposed, the impact is minimal. And so one of the reasons for classifying information in general is to understand to what degree does it need to be protected. And so anytime that you apply as a business a security control, there is a cost benefit analysis involved. You have to make sure that the cost of the control does not outweigh the cost of the problem you're trying to fix. And so as a small to medium business, what are the core business functions? Are you management based, right? Are you on the management team and you're thinking, okay, these are my business continuity plans, these are the core functions of the business? Or are you coming at it from an IT perspective, as in, okay, what about my security? What about my infrastructure? Those two teams should be focused on the correct or the same topic, the same functions. And when you're looking at your cybersecurity risks, by the way, I love this picture. Download smaller viruses to your computer to help it build an immunity. Don't do that. Sorry, that was tongue in cheek. Please don't take that advice. Overall, small to medium businesses are going to deal with many of the same risks that any larger corporation will deal with. You're going to have identity theft. You're going to have web-based defacement, DDoS, phishing attacks, ransomware, data loss. All of those types of considerations are going to factor into the types of controls that you need to put in place. The maturity of your organization's security department, the organization of your security team, or I want not team is not the right word. Program, thank you. Your security program, this is going to make a difference. The value and the usability of the data is also going to factor in. Here's a good example. Financial institutions. You figure banks, credit cards, credit unions. In most cases, the security controls that are related to credit cards and other type of information like that are usually pretty high. For example, if someone steals my card information, if someone misuses it, if it gets leaked somewhere and someone attempts to use it, within minutes, that has typically been identified. The use has been identified, the card has been turned off, the transaction has been canceled. It's typically simply a notification on my phone saying, no, that was not me. And there's a refund to my bank account and a new card is being shipped out, typically within 24 hours. Those are some pretty quick moving controls. Those are some pretty quick, comprehensive identification, alert, response, all of those things related to your credit card information. However, you take something like medical information. This is where you've got your social, you've got your address, you've got prescriptions, you've got your history. And in most cases, there are fewer controls around healthcare data. In a situation like that, even though someone's credit card may have thousands upon thousands of dollars available for it, or their bank account, the controls make it much, much more difficult for an attacker to abuse it without getting caught or stopped. It's not that it doesn't happen, it's just that it's much more difficult to do. Healthcare, fewer controls, which means in the long run, we'll look at this here in just a minute in the next slide, but which means overall that an attacker would typically, in general, again, they would consider healthcare data more valuable than credit card information. Because you can assume someone's identity, you can take out loans on their behalf. Fewer protections, slower response, less controls, make it an easier target. And so when you keep that in mind, the maturity of the organization that's dealing with this is going to factor in, as well as the value and how easily that data is able to be used. Interesting note from, I think it was probably about a year or so ago, that the Federal Trade Commission had received over 250,000 identity theft reports. That is massive. 250,000 just for identity theft. And in most cases, they're not equipped to track down each one of those in a timely fashion. It's not that they can't track down individuals, but in a timely fashion. And then how much damage can be done? I was actually testing an application that dealt with collecting unemployment. It was collecting unemployment. And back when COVID was going on and people were like, hey, we're going to try and keep working for as long as we can before we have to let you go. We're going to ride this out as long as we can. And they like, okay, I'm not going to put in unemployment. They get laid off at some point 6 months later. They go to apply and suddenly they're getting notifications back saying, this account, this user, this person already has unemployment being provided. And so now you've got this huge issue where someone has done basically an instance of identity theft, and you have to jump through all the hoops to say, okay, no, I am who I am. Whoever you've paid this out to is inaccurate, and to get all that fixed. Sorry, jog my mind, because identity theft, it takes time sometimes, and it may not be caught right away for various reasons. So this right here is actually taken from the 2023 DBIR report. And the reason I throw this up here, I love this piece. The reason I throw this up here is because if you look at frequency, patterns, threat actors, and motivations, there is a very close difference between larger organizations and small businesses. Here's what's happened. And the reason I want to call this out is because increasingly over the past several years, larger companies, smaller companies, they're using a lot of the same services. They're using a lot of the same applications. They're using a lot of the same infrastructure, which means, right, Azure, O365, they're using a lot of the same things, which means that the attack surface, the gap between that attack surface between small and medium or small and larger businesses has shrunk. It has decreased significantly because we're all using the same technologies. And so at some point, the attack profiles between these different sizes of organizations has converged. And so that profile is very, very small now. The main difference, which we're going to see down at the data compromise section, is the main difference between these two groups is that the larger businesses have more people, they have more budget, they probably have a dedicated staff dedicated to their security, to their infrastructure, to response, to whatever. And so they're able to respond better. But overall, very, very similar. The gap between small and medium businesses versus larger has gotten it's narrowed considerably. And so as a point of just some very, very quick math, I wanted to point out, because on small to medium business, the note here, and this was 2023, DBIR just recently came out. I haven't updated this since that had come out last week, I think it was. But 54% of the data compromise related to credentials. Now, for a small business, you figure for easy math, let's do 100 employees, which is not a small business. That's more of a medium business. But still, 54%, 54 credentials, 54 accounts where credentials were compromised. A large business, 37%. Now, percentage-wise, that's a huge gap. You figure it's almost 20% difference. But mathematically, if you're looking at 1,000 employees with 37% credentials being compromised, that's 370 accounts versus the 54. And so even though the same types of data is being compromised, credentials, internal accounts, or I should say internal information versus internal information. But for the sake of quick math, on a small to medium business, 54% of credentials, you're looking at probably 54 accounts. 37% of credentials compromised. On a larger business, you're looking at 370-ish accounts. So even though there's a huge difference percentage-wise, I should say percentage-wise, it looks like there's a larger difference. In actuality, the larger businesses still have more. But yeah, this is just really to show that there really is not a huge gap between the things that are being compromised, the types of attack patterns being done between the small and medium businesses and larger businesses. And it comes down to, we got about 15 minutes. Even those larger organizations who have more security, have dedicated teams, they still run into incidents. So the question is, what can the small to medium businesses do to protect themselves? For example, if you're a smaller or medium business, you probably have one or two IT people who are wearing multiple hats, probably never sleep. What can they do to protect themselves? What can they do that's not going to cost a lot of resources, not going to take and cheap deception, the basics and cheap deception. I love it. Yeah, what can they do? Right, because they're not going to have the budget. They're not going to have the manpower. Something that's not going to take a lot of resources, not going to take a lot of maintenance, because how many of us have been sold a tool that says, hey, this is going to solve your problem, and then it takes 6 months to tune that tool to your environment or your network. It's amazing how many times that happened. I remember the first time that I ran into that issue, the disillusionment was high. So there are some tools that you can use that have minimal requirements and provide a huge degree of value, which is where we're going to get into this piece of it. CIS controls. And if I had to choose frameworks, because there's a lot of different frameworks out there that you can use. If you have compliance requirements, if you have regulatory recommendations, there may be other frameworks to consider. And a framework really is just going to be a guideline for being able to implement security control, security structure or program consistently. You typically don't want to mix frameworks unless the one that you've actually decided on has a gap someplace, and you need to use something else to fill that gap. But in most cases, you'll stick with a single framework because it's meant to be a cohesive unit. For people starting out, especially small to medium businesses that have limited budget, limited manpower, there are a lot of things that can be used. This right here is actually from the 2024 DBIR that I pulled out specifically for this. And the highlights that I would want to look at, going back to the previous slide where data, credentials, internal information was being compromised, those were the targets for both small and large organizations. Down here, data recovery, huge. That's something that these are some controls you can consider to implement that don't cost a lot of money. Most of them are configuration based, right? You can adjust the configuration. You can look at what's needed to change. You can reconfigure. In most cases, people assume that the default configuration given to you by any application or any tool that you put in is the secure configuration. That is simply not the case. In most considerations, when a tool is being installed, the main consideration is get it up and working, not get it up and working securely. And so when you apply these things, in most cases, you're going to have to take another look through the configuration. I'll provide a link here in a minute because there's a CIS benchmark that can be added where for specific applications, whether it's Azure, I'll use O365 again, there's a few others that you can go through and it will give you for level 1, just a basic level of secure configuration, set these specific settings depending on what version of the environment you're working in. But data recovery, right? Ransomware. That's one of the top considerations, one of the top threats small and medium businesses are going to look at. How do you protect your data? How do you recover your data? The best thing to do for ransomware related is prevention. In the event that something does happen, data recovery is your response. Accounts. Since people are looking at accounts, and that is one of the top vectors, account management. These are controls that you can put in place. MFA. MFA is such a simple control. It is such a simple tool, and it's usable everywhere. Something like MFA can stop someone from taking over, like they can get credentials. It limits what they can log into, right? There's some, it significantly mitigates some of the greater risks that you're going to have when it comes to account information access. If you've got anything that's sensitive, whether it's in your application or email or something, MFA is going to be useful. Just make sure that it's a separate, it's not using the same thing. So, okay. Looking at time, wrapping things up, a few quick highlights, devices, accounts, make sure that I'm not forgetting anything. And there you go. I'm going to go ahead and hop to this so that we can have a few minutes for questions. I didn't want to run up to the very end in case there were a lot of questions that came through. Hold on here.
Thanks, Bill. You're awesome too.
Yeah, Bill talking to Bill. I thought the Bill Murray and Bill was a funny, funny play on words. I think I'm funny, but I'm really not.
No, there's some laughs there today for sure.
Here, I'm gonna see if I can paste this into the chat, if that's all right.
Thank you so much for doing this today with us, Bill. It was great, man. We had a lot of questions come through, and I, heard you answering a lot of questions also via Discord. But we had a lot of different questions come through via Zoom as well.
Oh, please throw them in. I don't know that I'll have all the answers, but we'll see what we can come up with.
So I do see this one. It says, you said that might not be the case with regards to secure configurations. Can you repeat that point?
What context?
Secure configurations? I'm not sure.
Oh, yes. Okay. When you're installing something, in most cases, they're going to want the application to be installed and work with minimal input, minimal use, minimal configuration. In most cases, the default installation is not the secure configuration. So the idea is, just because you've installed something, don't assume that the initial installation is secure. Look at the configurations that deal with security and apply those based on the application you're putting in place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Bill, if I can add to that answer, I know it may have changed in the last few years, but I know when you first opened up a MacBook, when you got that, firewall was disabled by default. You'll understand that when companies sell products, even physical products, to give to end users, they're focused on functionality.
Well played. Yep.
For security in most cases.
Yeah, they want it to work.
Yeah.
Security is your problem.
Security is everyone's problem.
That's how they're going to approach it. They're like, nope, we just want to make sure it works. You want to secure? That's mostly your problem.
Somebody asked, how much does a pen test cost? Like, what do you typically charge?
That's a good question, and that varies depending on where you go and who you're talking to. For us, we do have rates on our website. Some do, some don't. In most cases, so the cost of a pen test is largely going to depend on the size and scope of the test, right? Because it's all about effort. You've got how many people for how many days to test how complex of a system. All of those factors go into what is the overall scope, how much time and effort do we need to actually get good coverage through whatever, either application, network, whatever we're dealing with. So there's a lot of considerations. I'm thinking configuration because of the CIS stuff, but there's a lot of considerations when it comes to actually how those are scoped out.
That's like about as hard of a question to answer as what bachelor's degree should I get if I want to be a good generic infosec practitioner. We were talking about this in the backstage. Like, that's a hard question to answer, and just like that, how much does a pen test cost? Well, it's going to vary.
Right.
There's so many different variables that,
as the resident salesman, I would answer that question with a question to get
Yes. What do you want?
Depends. What do you want?
Yeah.
What other questions we got for him?
What do you want? What's your budget?
Yeah.
How do the upcoming blue boxes and red boxes coming up in the AI market change this field?
I'm not overly familiar with the blue and red boxes. What can someone give me some background on that? Or does someone else?
I think Captain Carson Tiva probably summarized it very closely. You got to be careful with the whole term AI not equaling large language models. So there's a vast difference between what one would call actual AI and then an LLM. Beyond that, I will say this, just from, I'm not 100% certain I know which the blue boxes and the red boxes, but I can surmise, I think, what you're trying to get at. This is nothing new. I think I've heard about AI-based things for 6, 7+ years now. And I'll leave it at that. It's not anything necessarily new. And it might be a new flavor of it, but yeah, what do you guys think? I know, Chris, I was talking with another tester recently. I thought it was you, about like utilizing Copilot and different AIs for post-exploitation things and how that stuff gets incorporated. But yeah, what's your take on a lot of this?
No, yeah, that wasn't me that we were having that conversation, but I'm trying to remember who it was that was doing that, where they
Corey
were
was
able to
doing stuff.
use Copilot. I know that Bronwyn is working on I forget which conference exactly, but she's doing an AI talk at a conference that kind of looks into sort of that stuff, I believe.
I'd want to know more about what the blue boxes and red boxes are.
Somebody asked a similar vein. It says, sorry if this is a dupe. Company rolls out a new AI system. Do folks pen test AI systems, not limited to LLM?
Yeah. Like what we were just talking about with Chris around the Copilot within M365 environments. A lot of AI stuff from that perspective comes down to the permissions of the individual users for that particular environment. So how are you regulating what permissions that user has? And then therefore they're going to have those same levels of I guess, application if that user is compromised utilizing that AI. So I will say a lot of those things, blue teamers are not looking at it from the perspective of how it can be used to help secure their environment. A great example with the Copilot one was, logging in as a certain level of user and being like, hey, give me all the files that have passwords in them. And it'll show you all the files that have passwords. And you can, okay, we just found some bad stuff. Show me all the files that have social security numbers. Same thing. Show me all the files that have bank account information in it. And so it's a lot of these tools can be used for things for the blue teamers as well. I don't know if that answered the question, but
there was there was another thought that come to mind as you were saying that, because you mentioned the AI user. So the AI user account has a certain level of permissions.
correct.
You want to keep in mind what level of permissions that has, and to make sure that those are restricted appropriately.
Yeah. Our general recommendation is to neuter it to the point of where like Copilot is essentially a chat GPT, but for your own internal instance. And Microsoft does say it's like, well, it's your own instance. We're not taking any information from it. Promise. But I just don't, I have a hard time trusting that.
You can think of those sort of AI instances in the same relationship as a web application interacting with a database.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
If you give it a database administrative level account to access the database, then if you have a vulnerability, it's going to be that much worse, right? If there is an issue with what it can access, it's going to be that much worse if you've given it such a broad range. And it does really, I haven't come across it personally yet, but it does almost act like a quick search engine, sort of like a rapid automation of trying to find more things in an environment, because it's built to know what's in the environment and give contextual answers around that. It's probably not polished to the point of saying, wait, you asked for passwords. No, we don't allow that in our terms of service or something. Like, you can't ask that question. Like if you use ChatGPT and you type in certain stuff, it'll say, because of our licensing, we don't answer that. We don't do that. And it sort of limits it.
Yeah. And there is some logging stuff that you can do around Copilot. It's very weak right now. But that's the other thing that I would look for with any sort of AIs internally, is logging the sort of queries that your users are putting there. Maybe search for keywords around permit, like if they're looking for something about passwords or social security numbers or bank account information. You flag those and ask them why. Payroll, anything like that. So I will say that a lot of these things, when it comes to us testing them, it really is going to come down to the fact that we can and we have, but we mostly leverage it as like a post-exploitation aspect of things. And I would also argue that blue teamers should be leveraging and utilizing it as well to help secure their environment and seeing what users have access to. It's going to help streamline a lot of stuff for blue teamers.
There's a lot of functionality that's take advantage of the tool for the purpose that it excels at,
Mhm.
but be aware of the risks.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, Bill, for your time. We're a couple minutes past the hour now. Thank
Anytime.
you, everybody, for joining us today. If you guys are interested, we have our breakout room. So if you are joined on Zoom, you have the application installed on your device. You can click on the breakout rooms link there, and you can join us in a breakout room right after we sign off here, and join us to ask questions. We're there to help you guys out. Thank you again for Bill for being here. Brian,
Yes,
Chris,
thank you.
Megan, thank you guys for being here as well. Tune in next week. We're going to have Wade Wells joining us. He's going to be talking about threat models, landscapes, and profiles. And that Anticast next week is actually going to start at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, because we are going to be live streaming John Strand's Pay What You Can class, active defense, active. I always screw that one
Active
up.
defense and cyber deception.
Yeah, that one. We'll be live streaming that on YouTube all of next week. So starting Monday through Thursday, we will be live on YouTube with John that entire week. So please join us and join Wade Wells next week as well. Thank you all for joining, and I'll see y'all in the breakout room.
All right. Thanks,
Awesome.
Bill.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
Bill.
Bye.